Many people in the West who dream of socialism today have little idea what life was really like inside the Soviet Union, the most prominent example of a fully developed socialist system. From time to time, I plan to share short reflections based on writings by those who actually lived there. I realize, though, that taken one by one and without the full context, many of these details might still feel confusing or hard to grasp. One of the most beloved films in Soviet cinema was Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears, directed by Vladimir Menshov and released in 1980. It won an Academy Award and touched the hearts of millions. But for those who lived through the realities of the Soviet Union, some scenes in the movie raise questions about how accurately they portrayed everyday life, especially when compared to the myths that sometimes circulated abroad. The film opens in the late 1950s, with sweeping shots of Moscow streets. In one early frame, the camera lingers on the window of a gourmet food store, a gastronome, filled with jars of black caviar, the expensive roe from sturgeon fish. This image suggests a time of plenty, where even a luxury like black caviar was readily available in ordinary shops. In the 1950s, black caviar was indeed more common and affordable in the Soviet Union than it later became. It was harvested in large quantities from the Caspian Sea, and people in fishing regions sometimes grew tired of eating it so often. But by the late 1950s and 1960s, the Soviet government began exporting huge amounts to earn foreign currency, since Western buyers saw it as an elite delicacy. This export drive turned caviar into a scarce item at home, often hard to find without special connections. Many who lived in Moscow during those years never saw a store window piled high with caviar jars in real life, only in movies. The scene feels like a nod to an earlier era, or perhaps an idealized picture, meant to impress viewers far from Soviet realities. As the camera pans across the bustling street, perhaps Gorky Street, one of Moscow's main avenues, a young couple walks arm in arm, clearly affectionate. Suddenly, a group of civilian volunteer patrol, known as druzhniki, approaches them. These were ordinary citizens who helped maintain public order, wearing red armbands to show their role. They sternly tell the couple to stop embracing in public. The young people look embarrassed and separate. In the 1950s, Soviet society emphasized strict public decorum. Open displays of affection, even simple hugging, were often seen as improper, especially in cities. These volunteer patrols did sometimes intervene in such moments, reflecting the era's conservative norms. Interestingly, the United States in the 1950s was also quite puritanical, though perhaps not to the same degree. The story centers on Katerina, or Katya, a young woman from a provincial town who has come to Moscow. She lives in a workers' dormitory with two friends, all hoping for better lives in the capital. Katya dreams of studying at a university, but when she fails the entrance exams, she must return to her job at a textile factory. There, she works as a machine adjuster, a skilled but demanding role fixing industrial equipment when it breaks down. Why does she stay? In one scene, Katya explains during a television interview that the pay for adjusters is low, which is why many men quit. She suggests raising wages or improving standards, but nothing changes. Soviet propaganda often boasted about full employment. Factories hung signs everywhere saying, workers needed, adjusters, machinists, operators wanted. Officials claimed this proved the superiority of socialism, no unemployment, unlike the capitalist West. The reality was different. Those constant job postings meant the work was hard and poorly paid. Soviet workers weren't foolish, they avoided low-wage, grueling jobs when they could. In Moscow, this labor shortage was solved in a particular way, one that reveals much about life in the Soviet Union. To understand Katya's situation, we need to talk about Moscow's special status. The capital was privileged. It received better food supplies, goods, and services than most other cities, let alone rural areas. The best universities, theaters, hospitals, and research institutes were concentrated there. Simply being born in Moscow gave someone advantages over citizens from elsewhere in the vast country. People from smaller towns often resented Muscovites for this unearned privilege. Why didn't everyone just move to Moscow? The answer lies in a system called propisca, a mandatory residence permit stamped in every citizen's internal passport. Without a Moscow propisca, you couldn't legally live, work, or access services there long-term. Moving between smaller cities was easier, but Moscow, and a few other major centers, strictly limited new residents to prevent overcrowding. There were only two main legal ways to get a Moscow propiska: marriage to a Muscovite, or through a job quota system. Factories and large enterprises, like the giant auto plants ZIL or AZLK, could apply for a limited number of slots to hire workers from outside the city. These newcomers, often young people from rural areas or small towns, lived in factory dormitories for years, sometimes 5 or 10, while waiting for an apartment and permanent registration. Muscovites called these migrant workers limachiki, a term that literally meant something like a load by limits, but quickly became derogatory, implying they were uncultured or inferior, limited people. Native residents looked down on them, even though the city desperately needed their labor for tough factory jobs that locals avoided. The limachiki endured poor conditions and harsh treatment from bosses, afraid to complain, lest they lose their chance at registration. Once they finally got the prized Moscow propiska, many quit the factory and moved to better jobs. The cycle continued, with new arrivals filling the spots. This system fueled resentment. People across the Soviet Union grumbled about Muscovites hoarding the best opportunities, while ignoring how the propiska rules locked everyone else out. Katya's story unfolds against this backdrop. Like many young women in the film, she represents those who came to Moscow chasing opportunity, willing to endure hardship for a foothold in the privileged capital. The movie celebrates resilience and success, but beneath its romantic surface lie these quieter truths about inequality, scarcity, and the rigid controls that shaped daily life in the Soviet Union.